we're going to get started. To be respectful of everyone's time, we do have a couple people signing in, but I think otherwise pretty much everyone's situated. So good evening, I'm Jean Boubon, town planner for another week or so. Our project team is with us this evening to talk about the Douty Road plan. Thank you all for coming. We know the weather is terrible and you'd probably rather be in where it's nice and dry, but thank you for coming out. So our project team on the staff side is Andrew St. George, our recreation director, Jacqueline Burmeister, our assistant DPW director, Heather Blakely, our DPW director, Lauren Vivier, our conservation agent, Janae Lacey, our land use and development coordinator, and Robin Grimm, our town administrator. It is my pleasure to introduce your new town planner, Aidan Adams. So with us this evening, we have Annalise Cobley from PAR and John Shevlin from PAR Corporation. And so many of you were probably with us maybe about a month ago, and you participated in a public forum and filled out some forms, worked on some maps, and provided us a great deal of input. And Annalise and her team did a wonderful job of synthesizing all of that information, and they provided our technical review team with some concepts that we then kind of hashed out and reviewed, and kind of knowing the town and the challenges and this particular piece of property, we narrowed that down to a concept that we think can work for this property, will best meet the needs of the community, and not overburden this particular piece of land given the sensitive natural resources, the neighborhood, and everything else involved. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Annalise. She'll present the concept that we've selected and that we've refined. After that, Robin Grimm will get up and talk about next steps and say a little more about the process, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. So again, thank you all for coming, and with that, I'll turn it over to Annalise.
Jean. Can everyone hear me okay? Oh. Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Annalise Cobley, and we're here to talk about the Douty Road property conceptual master plan. For anyone who didn't join us, last meeting on June 10th, PAR Corporation is a local civil engineering firm that provides a variety of civil engineering services and has worked with the town for many years now. And as I mentioned, my name is Annalise Cobley. I have been with PAR since 2019. I specialize in land development and stormwater management, mostly K through 12 facilities with athletic uses. And then many of you may have met Adrienne Lennon from our last meeting. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be here tonight with us, but we're joined by John Shevlin, who is PAR's CEO and has worked with the town for many years. Just a quick overview of some of the points that we'll be hitting tonight. I'll do a quick summary of the community feedback that was received and how we got to the conceptual figure. Then we'll do a walkthrough. As you see, we brought handouts to kind of help with the visualization since the screen is so far away, but we'll go step by step through the concept figure to kind of convey the general intent, and then have time for next steps and questions with the public. So on June 10th, we had a community public forum where there were 4 subject topics that were discussed. This included tabletop exercise with community feedback forms and also maps that represented the existing conditions that allowed community members to lay out some of their thoughts and ideas and make sure that their intent for the needs of the property were being met through these 4 key subjects. So that included passive recreation activities, active recreation activities, conservation connectivity, and then land use management as well. So this was the existing conditions plan that we used at the time. Just to orient the group for the property is about 220 acres and is outlined in the red dashed lines. And we have Douty Road in the center, we have Holland Road to the west, and then we have Sounding Hill to the east. And we'll be talking tonight about the north parcel and the south parcel, which is delineated by Douty Road. So that'll be a terminology we use often tonight. So what we heard from the community feedback, we'll start with passive recreation activities. At a high level, we heard that trails for hiking and biking were desired by the community to be included within the property, but then also including ADA accessible walkways as well, so it can be used for all age groups. There's also a strong desire for there to be adequate parking to meet the needs if people wanted to visit the site daily for different uses, and making sure that there was enough programming space for other passive recreation activities or light equipment activities such as bird watching, picnicking, dog walking, things of that sort, to support the needs for the property. Then we had active recreation activities. This was for athletic field uses and equipment-heavy uses. There was a strong desire for a multi-purpose field since there's not one owned by the town currently, and making sure that that multi-purpose field could fit multiple sports, which would include soccer, lacrosse, flag football. There's also desires for other active recreation opportunities such as pickleball, tennis, basketball, and making sure, again, that there's adequate parking to meet the demands for events that were held at these multi-purpose fields. For conservation land connectivity, there was a strong desire that the parcel have connections to Haynes Farm and then also the Riverlands. Haynes is to the east and then Riverlands is to the north, to make sure that those trails have connectivity for the biking and hiking trails to the north. And then finally, for land management, there was a strong desire from the public to make sure to preserve as much of the existing forestry as possible, while also providing habitat restoration and invasive species removal where there had been previous disturbance and where we could help re-establish the habitat within this area. It's a very large parcel, so we want to make sure too that the forestry is being managed properly, so making sure that there's service access for those trails in the forest so it can be properly maintained was also noted as well. Based on all of that community feedback for those major subjects, working with the town, as Jean mentioned, we developed the concept figure that you see here. I'll go through step by step for some of the key features, but the intent is that this is a well-balanced property that all community members can enjoy with a wide age range as well, and making sure that it meets the general intent of what we heard the evening of June 10th, which was making it a space that community members are proud of, making it a place that feels special. We talked about the sunsets to the west and what that means to the community. We also did some youth programming as well, where they filled out some of their wishes and sketched out what they hoped the fields to look like. There was a strong desire from the youth to have an ice cream bar, which unfortunately did not make it on this plan. However, there is plenty of opportunity for ice cream bars, I think, to fit within the concept plan and in this development in the future. So, as you know, making it a special place for everyone. So I'll kind of talk through the concept plan now. We're going to start with grouping some of the key features, and I'll walk through on my example here, but then also feel free to look down at your example too, just so you can see a little bit better as well. And then just want to make sure everyone can still hear me okay. So the main groupings of what is represented in this plan includes the existing conditions in the legends, the proposed land uses, we identified A through K, and then just key site features for other items that we wanted to note and represent within the plan. There will be a report that goes with the plan as well that goes into more detail for each of these key features, but tonight we'll just kind of hit on these topics at a high level. So for existing conditions, if we go to the next slide. As I mentioned before, there is the north subject parcel outlined in red and then the south subject parcel. Then we do have identified the abutting parcels outlined in black. That includes conservation land and also private residential properties. Then the concept plan also includes approximate stone wall limits that we're using GIS information to know where those resources are located. And also the plan represents the existing topography or contours that are on the parcel now. The parcel is extremely steep, It has a wide grade change, as you may have experienced before going down Douty Road. So that is also one of the constraints of this property, is understanding how to develop the land. In addition, we have the natural resource areas identified, including the approximate limits and the buffer and jurisdictional areas. During the community feedback, it was a strong desire from the community to make sure we are not impacting those natural resource areas, so making sure that we have proper offsets and maintaining those buffers as much as possible, and that the development is compatible with these existing natural resources. There's a major wetland complex to the north that abuts the Riverlands property, and then also a large wetland complex in the south property as well that stretches from east to west. And then again, just at a high level, so you can see that all those existing conditions represented on a large scale on the plan. Again, wetland complex to the north and then also to the south. And then for the proposed land uses, which I think is the fun part of why we're here tonight to kind of talk about, we have first the multi-purpose fields, which are represented to the west of the site. This includes use for soccer, lacrosse, and flag football, and meet the National Federation of High School Sports Association standards for sizing. These would be premier natural turf fields, which means that they're grass, and they require irrigation and drainage systems to ensure that the field's performance continues to be high performing for athletes that use it, and making sure that the field is maintained and rested so that there's not damage from continued use over time. So having those drainage and that irrigation system within it allows it to be a high-performing field. To the east, we have an area designated for flexible field space. This area will be a level lawn area that can be used for youth practice for athletics. It can also be used for recreational programming space, and it is large enough for use for a multi-purpose field, but then also for baseball if there was any ever desire to use that area for any kind of practice related to baseball as well. The intent of providing the parking lot too is that the space can be activated, and while it is still part of the north parcel, it does provide some separation due to the tree line located here, and allows opportunity for different types of uses can be activated in that area. For C, which is the opportunity recreation areas, we have two identified, one in the north parcel and then one in the south parcel as well. This provides opportunity for more detail to be developed on what type of recreation activity infrastructure we'd like to see within those areas. So right now the area delineates approximately 2 basketball courts could fit within it, but also 3 tennis courts, or it could be preserved to use as lawn for lawn games or other programming space needs. The area to the south could fit a half-court basketball and then about 2 tennis courts in that area, and pickleball also included within the tennis. The area to the south, the intent of the conceptual design was to provide more passive recreation uses and for the public to enjoy the landscape in that area because of how beautiful the views are from the grades that exist within the land, and having complementary uses where it can be a peaceful space to walk, have different program activities such as yoga, and kind of enjoy the atmosphere of the south parcel. Next to the optional recreation area, we have a meadow restoration or pollinator garden. This is to provide areas for bird watching, habitat, and educational signage for youth and for all ages to learn about some of the native plant species that could be planted in that area. Then we also have a pavilion area designated for the north parcel and the south parcel. This is to be a lawn area that includes a pavilion to provide shade structures, picnic tables, and a general gathering space for each of the parcels for the community to use. Then we have, which is not as exciting, but parking lots, because we all know that parking is an important infrastructure need as well for these land developments. So we have 3 parking lots, 2 in the north parcel and 1 in the south. In total, it results in about 175 spaces. This could be increased to what the town's needs are depending on the programming, or it can be reduced down and limited to what the town really needs for those areas. There's also flexibility for the materials of those parking lots, but right now they're scoped to just be traditional asphalt and then provide ADA accessible spaces as well to the park. Then we also included 3 playgrounds throughout the development, and that is to help complement the need for all age ranges uses. So as someone may be walking the paths with their friends and family, and maybe there's a soccer game going on, that there's also another program space as well for playgrounds and use for youth programming. And finally, we have an area in the center of the north parcel that is designated for concession stands, portable bathrooms, and athletic equipment storage. This is to provide opportunities for things like the ice cream bar, as we mentioned, also different types of carts that could be used for food sales, and also the location of it was provided access where if a food truck wanted to be activated in the space, the parking lot provides opportunity to have space for that near this area that's centrally located with all the proposed uses. Finally, we have stormwater management scattered throughout the north and south parcel because it'll be important to manage the peak flows and provide water quality treatment based on the development's needs. And finally, we have traffic and signage safety noted at the center of Douty Road. This is to ensure safe crossing between the north and south parcel, whether that be wayfinding signage, traffic controls such as beacons, and then making sure that the crosswalk is a safe condition for all community members to use. And then again, you can see on the screen the larger scale, as I just explained, for the general intent. And the core of the proposed land uses is about 35 acres of development. But as a reminder, the south and north parcel in total is about 220 acres, so still providing a significant amount of preserved land for other uses. And then finally, I'll hit on some other key features that we wanted to be noted in the plan. This includes areas for habitat restoration and also invasive species removal along the fringe edge of the forest line. Our wetland scientists, when we went and observed the site and did a walkthrough on June 2nd, did observe some areas with invasive species due to the clearing over the last few years of the land's use as agricultural. So noting those areas for invasive species removal. Then we also noted trail gateways, and that was based on the conservation connectivity activities that were provided for the community feedback forms. We also identified trail crossings where there'll need to be some type of structure in place to make sure that the trail has continued use even through the wetland resource areas, so making sure that's a safe condition that can be used for all seasons. Then throughout the north and south parcel, we have identified ADA walkways to provide compliance and use for all groups. And that is about 1.5 miles of walkway. Right now, it's recommended that they be concrete to be ADA accessible. However, there could be alternative materials that could be used in the future or considered. Then for trails and the trail paths, I will say, I think there's a lot of people in the room who are much more experts about trails than I, but I did lay out conceptually some options of where the routing could go and make connections based on the community feedback that we received. One thing I would like to note is that it's about 3 miles of trails, roughly. However, that could be increased or decreased depending on the town's needs. And we did note in red emergency service access points to provide that maintenance and emergency needs for trail access to the property. Also noted at the top is the connectivity to the Riverlands trail system and making sure that there can be continued use down into the parcel and connectivity from the Riverlands Trail to our pump track, which is also represented on the plan for the biking community. For anyone who doesn't know, a pump track is a wheeled equipment performance area where you use grade changes in order to perform different fun activities, doing tricks, things like that. So we wanted to make sure that the pump track was located to the north of the parcel, close to these trail systems and close to the Riverlands connectivity. And then finally, we do have also educational signage noted throughout the plan to provide trail resources and then education about the property and area, and then provide resources such as trail maps as well for people who attend the property. So overall, you can see the context of the trail system throughout the entire north and south parcel, also making sure that there are points of connection between the north and south parcel as well. And overall, as I mentioned before, the intent was to balance the site with all the various uses that the community would like to see and make sure it's a space for all community members. So with that, if there are any questions, and we can go to Robin with some next steps, and then we'll take questions from the public.
So thank you all. I want to thank Power Corporation. This was I'm on this one. Oh, yeah. I don't know. Can you hear me? Okay.
You want to take it over there?
Yeah, that was hot. They're all, yeah, those are always hot things. Always good to remember a hot mic. So thank you all for coming and for coming back in many cases. I do want to acknowledge that Selectman Phillips just came in. I did see our selectman come in. And so thank you all for coming. And I think I want to thank Park Corporation for really capturing, I think, what the community was saying at that last meeting that we had. And it's very hard to take what everybody wants and be able to give everybody a little bit of what they want, and not at the expense of anybody else. So while we know everybody's not going to walk away thrilled, and maybe we'd like a little more of this or a little less of this individually, the person sitting next to you probably wants just the opposite, a little more of that and a little more of this. So we tried really hard to do that balance. I have to say, on a personal note, I was really excited with this version because we all know that fields are a huge concern in this town. We need field space. But I think what really made this palatable to me is that it's 35 acres out of 220 being graded, flattened, used, or anything that people who are more leaning on the conservation and preservation side might have been very concerned about. And that is a beautiful parcel of land, and I think any of us, no matter how much we see the need for fields, would not have wanted to see that parcel leveled effectively or cleared. I also think what's really important is we're able to add miles of trails, but even with adding those miles of trails, you'll see a huge amount of the land is still untouched even by the trails. So 35 acres cleared for beautiful passive recreation and some active recreation, another portion for trails, but a vast majority still left in its natural habitat. That's, I think, what excited me the most about the plan. We obviously are going to have to look at next steps. We're going to have to look at funding. We're going to have to look at formal design. All of that is to come. So we're really preliminary at this point. What you see here are drawings that aren't ready for actual, we talked about this, for concrete numbers and costs and things like that. Realistically, though, we will have to phase this. So we know that trails can be done relatively cheaply, but grading in fields is a little bit more expensive. Clearing land is a little bit more expensive. Stormwater work, critical and not cheap. So I think what we're going to have to look at is how we phase this, and I think that that's going to have to be done on a combination of things. A, balancing the needs and the desires of the community, but B, also looking at the logical engineering phasing in. So you don't want to phase in doing a project that you're going to have to now cross over that to get to the other section. So it's going to be a balance, and we were talking today that it's going to be very possible to maybe look at the south part in one phase, the north part in two phases, because we are going to have to look at funding. And we're not, we have to, a lot of this will be eligible under CPC, which is wonderful, but again, CPC only has so much money too. And realistically, this is I'll be honest, this is a multi-million-dollar project. This doesn't come cheap. the slope of that land and the work that's going to have to be done on the land, even when we went to the easiest part, if you will, to put the fields, that 35 acres, we tried to pick the best land to do that on, but it's not going to be cheap. And we know that. So there's going to be still a heavy lift ahead, but I think that it's just a huge step to looking at something that the community can really embrace. I really like the idea of the flex field. I think that flex field is going to offer extra, we have so much trouble with like football practice, pee-wee, football practice. You can stick a tackle dummy on there and do that while you've got actual games, lacrosse, soccer going on the multi-purpose fields. So I think there's a good balance there. The pump track, the trails, people had really wanted the pump track, and so that goes up near the trails. The connectivity of the trails, I think, is also a huge portion of this. The trails people have been very, very passionate, and I think it's a wonderful, unique aspect of Sturbridge's trails that you really can just walk the town. I mean, through the trails, and there's an effort to finalize that, if you will, and make all the loops happen. And those trailheads and that connectivity, I think, is very exciting about this for the people who are looking at the trails aspect of it. So that's sort of where we're at. It's preliminary, but this is the plan. And what we do with this plan from here, from a standpoint of timing, funding, all of that lies ahead. It will still be a public process, but at this point, a lot of what happens from here is going to rely on, frankly, money and engineering logic. Logistics. Where do you start? We can pick a general concept of what we want to start with, but not at the expense of having to drive over a brand new multi-purpose field to get to the back part of the property. Obviously we're not going to do that. And so how we phase it in, how we logically phase it in, and can things be done simultaneously? We know that the trails are not going to be a highly expensive portion of this. So is there a way that can start in some aspect, but maybe not the trail heads? But some clearing. There are different ways that we can look at this. We will work with all the groups. We're obviously going to work with the Recreation Committee. We're going to work with the Trails Committee. We'll work with the open space people to really try to plan how we can do this, implement as quickly as we possibly can, based on financial constraints that we're obviously going to have to deal with as well. So thank you all, and we will take questions for a while and see what you all have to say.
My name is Jonas Snee. I live on Stallion Hill Road. One question I have is Douty Road itself. It's a thin road. I think at one point there was mention of the parking areas coming in from a different direction off of Holland Road. So I like that idea better because Douty Road is very thin and not easily maneuvered with all those curves. The second thing is, I noticed on the key here that there's well options. I'd like to know more about what their idea is for that. I know the town is always looking for well locations. They've tried it over on the lead mine trails. They failed. So I'd like to know a little bit more on that.
So I think, and I'll defer to the engineers obviously, but I think a big part of the discussion is going to be, we're going to have to irrigate fields. And likely running a water line and running water utilities up that way, water sewer, is going to be extraordinarily expensive and highly costly. And so if there are wells that are substantive enough for us to do irrigation wells, that is likely the direction we would go, and I'll defer if there's more that needs to be added to that.
Yeah, I can speak to the two well options that were represented on this plan. They're located on the east side here, and then also in the south parcel here. The one to the east side was there are, as many of you may know, this property was up for housing development many years ago. And when PAR was engaged for this project, we went through some of that existing conditions information of what the developer provided. And there was one location noted over here for potential for well. So at a high level, it's been identified as an option. However, there would have to be extensive well testing and feasibility study to know if it could produce the needs for irrigation for the fields. There's also an existing historic well to the south of the property that we observed in the field, And again, that would need extensive studies to know its feasibility to provide irrigation in that area as well. But those are the two options at a high level preliminary that we have identified for the plan.
Just real quick, that G1 playground, is it visible from the multi-purpose fields, like sightlines?
That is a great question. So depending on what the size of a prefab concession stand or a cart, I think it could have eye line, but also with the flexibility of the plan, we could swap those two locations too if it was desired to be closer. I think there's opportunity to make minor movements for some of those like smaller infrastructure pieces to make sure that there's proper visibility from all angles.
Multi-children families, you have like the older one playing,
Yep.
and the kids want to be on the playground, so you can't see them, that's a problem.
Yes, yes. And also, it'll be important too when we get to detailed design to make sure that any landscape that was proposed, let's say trees or shrubs, didn't block that line of sight as well.
Questions?
Just, sorry, Chris Mallon, just to go back to that water question, I was curious if those two well options actually were tested and functional. Did that mean that the site wouldn't need town water and sewer at all?
If a feasibility is performed for those two locations and it provides the gallons per minute needed for the irrigation demands of the multipurpose fields, then there would not be water infrastructure needed to be run to Douty Road.
Because we likely would look at doing portable facilities rather than go the effort of running water or sewer, which again is going to come with a cost and controversy.
Understood, yeah.
So,
So what you have here is the configuration, just a matter of where you put where exactly where.
so basically, where those things are generally are where we would expect them to be.
Which might shift things around a bit.
But a
Nothing-
small, yeah, minimal shifting, but for instance, the fields are pretty much where they're proposed to be. But small things like the playgrounds, where a bench goes, where a pavilion goes, 50 feet this way, 50 feet that way. So this is not set in stone completely, which is why even looking at numbers and everything else becomes difficult. Because there are going to be just logistics that are going to force someone, just the line of sight question. It's just as we start doing things, we're going to say, that's not going to exactly work.
And I can speak to that too, just because we wanted to make sure that the conceptual figure captured the entire scale of the 220 acres so we could see the big picture. But because the scale of this plan is so large at 250 feet, having those 10 feet, 25 feet differences is hard at this level. So we made sure that there's enough programming space and area to represent each of the land
Will there be work
uses.
done on the road itself? Have to be work done on the road itself.
What was that?
Will there be any work done on the road itself? Down
On Douty itself?
You're gonna have trucks going up and down that road, I assume. Heavy equipment, you're gonna be leveling things. What's your approach for that?
So that's a good question. So for Douty Road, right now, we're just representing that there needs to be traffic signal and safety improvements within the road. But as far as repaving or widening, right now, that's not being proposed. And then to answer the question about construction phasing, that would be up to a contractor when we get to that level, and making sure that whatever contract documents are submitted, that the contract includes that there's not impacts to the neighbors for that construction activity, and making sure that, there aren't causing damage to local roadways in order to bring equipment.
Right, sure, okay. So I have a few questions. So Robin, you mentioned in terms of breaking this into phases. So as a community, would we be voting at each phase?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's at each phase we would vote, not
Anytime I would seek funding,
Got it.
so it's,
Okay.
that would that
Sure.
forces the community involvement,
Okay.
which is a good thing.
Okay.
In a perfect world, I would want to do this as one big project. I mean, if we had the money, but it would be, the borrowing capacity of CPC, you were logistically just would not work. But if we can phase it into, I would love it if we could phase it into 3 chunks. If we can actually get it to 3, not 4 or 5. But yes, every step of this will be public. It'll have to go through CPC, if it's CPC funded, and then it'll have to go to town meeting. So you would have multiple opportunities to address it.
And would there be opportunity for changes at each phase, or is this, once it's set, it's set?
I think it's going to be minimal, because if we start doing one phase and you start changing that too much, it's going to impact the other phases. So what we are presenting to you is really what we envision the final product to be, short of those small 50-foot
I see.
changes.
Okay.
If somebody said, however, that,
For example-
instead of a tennis court, a
Yeah.
pickleball court,
Yeah.
I mean, as long as the footprint isn't changing, we could look at some of those uses, but I want to be careful not to get too excessive on that, because then I don't want the controversy of, well, let one of those multi-purpose fields be something else, because that's what the most significant features of this are not going to change from what we're presenting. So we are assuring the people who want fields that they will have two multi-purpose and a flex. We are assuring the people who want trails that they will have these trail paths and trailheads that are connected. Those won't change.
Perfect. Okay. Next question. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The fields. So are these fields being designed to withstand heavy usage all 4 seasons? Because that's what is, that's just what's on top of mind for any of us that are involved in youth sports, is the conditions of the fields we currently have.
And that's why making sure they're premier natural turf is really important. And where that maintenance of the grass and that turf comes into play is having proper drainage for the sand layers and then all the water to whip away so that there's not muddy conditions and the field is drying out properly. But then also adding water back to the field so that when the sun is beating down on it during those hot days, that we're not damaging the grass, creating a dust bowl. That irrigation drainage for the multi-purpose field is really key, and also programming and making sure that the field is rested properly as well. As we know, there's certain hours of play for a field, so making sure that it does get its rest after, large tournaments or things like that.
So to put that into, just to follow up a little bit on that, the flex field will not be as expensive, obviously, because we don't want to get. So what we don't want to do is have it where we're going to be pretty tough on those fields, those multi-purpose. We're going to invest a lot of money, and we're not going to let them, people aren't going to be able to just go hang out and run around up and dig them up when they're not being used for something constructive. The flex field is where if you want to go with your kid and toss the ball and do whatever you want. We're not going to, I want to have an area that we're not going to be forced the rest or forced sort of the control over, but let people have a nice big space that's a field, but not at the extent of those multi-purpose that are going to have to be high level, top quality, and properly rested. That all being said, this does not mean that our other softball fields and baseball fields aren't still going to be used. It does not mean that we won't look to do something over Burgess to, so we're trying to increase, we're not replacing. And I think that that's important, and it's not going to be easy, but we still are going to try to at least maintain what we have. This is not, if we went to replace, we basically create the same problem we have right now, which is we don't have enough. We need to add, not replace. So part of the resting is going to be, if you're looking to play baseball on the flex field or whatever, and we're leaving that pretty much open, but we might make sure that when Andrew's working with the leagues, that we say, hey, don't forget, Town Barn is there, you're going to use that. You're going to use the new softball fields over at this, softball fields at Burgess, for example. So there's going to be a lot of coordination from the rec side to make sure that those fields are rotated, rested properly, used appropriately, and that everybody doesn't say, well, I want to get new fields. It's just not going to work that way. We just get to hear it, that's what you do.
You did a great job capturing all the visions that people had, so well done. One question, somebody mentioned in the last meeting that there is a plan already for fields over by the town barn, and I'm wondering if it's more likely that fields can be added if those funds, if funds that the town is willing to put up are used there versus here.
So the town barn plan goes back several years. I've been asked to sort of brush it off and take a look at it. And I got started to, it was originally done back when our town clerk was the recreation director. I spoke with her about it, and it was never ideal from the beginning. There was a large amount of ledge there. She had worked with somebody who would try to take the ledge out at a very good cost to us. But part of the problem is since that time, we have found species there, and it's now part of the National Heritage Park. So we have a much, and I just found this out, back Ford just asked me very recently to look at this. What we determined, what I found out, that I did not know in the past month or so,
is that the land that we could use there is now significantly restricted for any type of expansion. So that does not mean, however, that what we are currently using there, we will not maintain and continue to use.
So whose responsibility will be the town's responsibility to line the fields properly for each individual sport and the schedule of the
That's the
fields?
league's.
So, okay, well, that's, I wanted
Yeah,
to.
and that would still be a level of coordination during sports seasons where there would be some overlap.
Soccer lines are different than lacrosse lines.
Right, and so, coordinating who's using what colors, paying attention to basically telling soccer,
the leagues
don't
will be
line for
responsible.
17 different field sizes in one space, so it'd be the leagues, but with coordination.
Gotcha.
First of all, just thank you for considering all the opinions in the room, and we're really excited about the opportunity around the fields here. Just want to make a couple notes. Number one being, the town barn concept that came up last time. I'd point out to the town that it was a really expensive proposal, and it still didn't meet the need. There was only one multi-use field there, and really that's the major demand on fields in town right now is the lack of multi-use fields. And as we look at this proposal, I just point as we think about phasing, we're a little bit under threat right now, and that all the leagues are really growing, and they're now reaching the point of being at capacity where they're based on the field constraints. We're not able to expand or add more teams. We're turning kids away, and then beyond that, there's the threat that there's a significant limitation on our access to the school fields. And we've even been told that we may lose our early practice window, which mean that kids are going to be practicing until 8, 9 o'clock at night, which isn't great for a first and second grader. So your help, trying to help address that with the school department would be greatly appreciated, but also anything we can do to really emphasize moving these fields into a first phase would be really key. Because unfortunately we've waited too long, and now we're in a spot where the leagues are under threat.
So I think theoretically, there's sort of two, I don't want to say competing entities, but two primary entities here. We have people who are very interested in the trails aspect, more sort of passive trails use, and we have people who want fields. And the trails portion, not the trail heads, those are a little more expensive. But the actual trails work, if there's grant money, which we know our trails people are phenomenal at getting grant money. They just got $400,000 for the bridge 2 weeks ago, they got that award. So they're phenomenal. This is something you were into. This is what you all do. That might start. That is a minimal impact financially. So I think if I'm going to look, on a personal level, where I do see the need, if we can swing the field work first without it being engineeringly illogical, then I absolutely would think that is a priority. But again, I have to look at it with engineers and say, okay, if we do that now, do we preclude our access to getting to do the trailhead work that we want to do, or are we going to now be frustrating these fields or interfering? I think it's doable. And then the other thing to keep in mind, though, is the next phase really is, before we even phase it, we're just talking about is the permitting and design. So we still have design and permitted. That's really going to have to be for the whole scope of the project. So the one next step I can tell you is going to be design and permitting. And then what we phase after we do that is where that discussion is going to come. Realistically, what I would like to do is at a future town meeting, whether it's a special in November or whatever we might do based on some other issues we've got going on, or the next town meeting or the next annual, is have an article there to figure out what we're going to do for the funding for the design and permitting. Design and permitting will not be cheap. It's usually about the rough estimate, we say 10% of what a project costs. Like, so we're talking about a multi-million-dollar project, we're talking about at least a $1 to $2 million design and permitting. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to do all those things, but we have to at least get the process going. So we have a little time that's going to be taken up with this other aspect, but I do absolutely understand that when we're looking at phasing it in, it may not be as important, important, for me to phase in south of Douty Road. That's something we might be able to do later. It's going to be a lovely addition to all of this, but that might be a phase 3 tier. Whereas, phase 2 is going to be part 1 north of Douty Road and Fields, part 2 east, northeast, and then the south. Again, provided that we're not stepping on ourselves trying to do it.
Another question, just how does conservation factor into this? Because I was I've been here for many field votes over many, many years, and Plimpton was voted in, and then conservation came into the mix, and then no fields happened. So I'd like to better understand that, and I'd also like to better understand how, I understand that we would have to vote on each phase, but do we vote in, like, you know, ideally, does the whole project get presented?
Probably not, so because you vote funding. So the public basically, your job as the public is to vote funding. So this doesn't go to town meeting. But when I ask for $1.5 million for permitting design, that goes to town meeting. And then that's when this generally would probably be presented. The reality is for the permitting design, that's effectively when this does get voted. Because that's when the public's going to see, this is what I need to get fully designed and permitted, here's what I'm asking you for the money.
I guess my concern was, like, does one phase end up getting voted in and then another phase?
It's possible that it could
So
not.
Trails gets voted in and then fields.
Right, but Trails isn't gonna be a separate phase realistically because the trailheads are gonna be part of a larger phase.
Yeah.
And the trails themselves, really so much of the work is done by the volunteers and grant funding.
Yeah.
I'm a little less concerned that CPC, they're gonna go, they might ask for 50 or 60,000 from CPC like they always do the trails, and they usually get it, and then they take that money and run with it.
Yeah.
That's not going to be the part that precludes this from going forward. It's going to be, okay, we just did the fields, and now we need a couple million more to do that east side of the playgrounds and the pavilion. If the town votes against that, then that just is going to stay the way it is, and I have fields. So I mean, it's a good question, but the only part I think that will get voted as a whole is going to be the design and permitting. And that's when the public will truly have the chance to look at it. After that, it's really going to be up people getting out to town meeting and saying, this phase is important to me. I have to tell you, I understand everything's important. To me, the whole project works. So if any one phase doesn't go through, it's really going to be a disappointment. I can't say that I want one more than the other. I know fields are a more critical need for a town-wide, from the concept of what the town truly needs and lacks compared to other communities, no question of fields. But from my standpoint, if we lose that part south with those beautiful views and that beautiful area, and we don't make something out of that gorgeous land that we've been donating, that would be a huge loss from my perspective. The conservation question, I'm going to defer over.
And I can actually just kind of backtracking for Plimpton a little bit. The issue with Plimpton was the natural heritage endangered species corridor that's over there. That was actually already natural heritage territory when the town adopted the property. It was just something that I think that got overlooked in this planning process. With this project here, of the technical team that's kind of looked at everything, we've kind of put our input in to do the least amount of impact to these resources. If you are out of the buffer zone or just on the outer edges of the buffer zone for where we're placing the fields, we've proposed some stormwater mitigation and some extra things down on that south end to do as much as we can to kind of buffer and protect those areas. So while this isn't necessarily something that the Conservation Commission, who would be the voting entity, has viewed, there's chances that for the field themselves, it might not even have to go to that board if you're not within those buffers. Because conservation only has the authority to vote on things within their jurisdiction. So that would be the 200-foot buffer, or if it's on a slope of 8% or greater, that buffer extends to 500 feet, which is also identified in here. So for the fields, we've tried to stay as close as that inner area that we can, that we're furthest from those buffers, that any activity that they'd really be looking at might be minor grading or stormwater infiltration.
I just had a question to follow up. You mentioned the CPC funding a couple of times. Is that something that's used for the entire site or only portions of it?
It depends. So certain things qualify for CPC and certain things don't. Most of this, because it's pretty much all in recreation, the vast majority will qualify in CPC. We just have to be careful of state law on certain things. If it's a sidewalk, it doesn't, but if it's a walking path, it does. So there's some areas that are going to be maybe borderline on CPC.
The road improvements would not.
Yes, road improvements will not.
Also depending on what grant options are available, so we don't deplete the CPC
Are
funding.
the fields included in that, or is that like different funding?
Yeah, fields are part of recreation.
And I will say, I know there was a couple of comments on Douty Road, and that is a fun road for sure. So it definitely would need to be looked at. And both ends of it is very tough. So I do think that adding more traffic might be a question mark.
Another question, I have a comment or a suggestion. This gets put before voters at town meeting and there's money involved. I think it's really important to have in that number the recurring cost to service and maintain these fields going forward. Because that's been a hidden cost in the past, but no one knows it. And all of a sudden, it's $500,000 a year we got to pay to do this, and people get surprised.
So,
I think that's
you're absolutely
unfortunate.
right, and so we've had this conversation, your particular committee was the one I was referencing today, when I said the first question I'm gonna get asked at FinCom is, how are you going to support this and maintain it? And Heather and I have talked about this, and how many people does it take, and how much equipment does it take, and how much are we gonna ask the leagues to help us?
How much more people?
Yeah, it's been,
Have the money to make this
absolutely.
happen?
So we are, I mean, again, we have time, but it is absolutely a question that before I can put this in front of FinCom at all, I know the first question is going to be that. So thank you for bringing it up and putting it out there, because it's, I just said it, the first question I'm going to get is that.
And to answer some of that too, I know all the leagues do pay for their fields in town when we do rent them from the schools or anything like that, so there is opportunity that if we need to do that, we're already charging our families to
And
rent.
whether or not we put that into some type of stabilization, whether or not we look at how we use a revolving fund, and that's going to be a Barbara question on, is there a way to help self-fund that?
Sorry, so annoying. Would Douty Road improvements be eligible to use Chapter 90 funds? Is that something that's would be eligible or no? Is that not?
Yes, in theory. I will very much caution everybody to thinking that Douty Road's gonna get widened or not be as curvy or any of those things. We're not putting sidewalks on it, we'll put a crosswalk. It will be paved and maintained. It's already a public use road. Trucks already go on that road. I can tell you it's already an insanely highly trafficked road. Much more than anybody, just local traffic. I live in Holland. I can tell you every single resident in Holland that uses Sturbridge Road goes over Douty Road every day.
And so
Because they don't want to go on Route 20.
Signalized crosswalks and whatnot.
But whatever we can do to maintain it and improve it, yes. There is no good way to make that road too much better. It has extreme turns, and it's going to be. And you wouldn't really want to take those out because, and by making it wider, you're just going to make the speed go faster.
We don't want speed.
Yes. So Douty Road will be the entry and exit road for the whole recreation.
No.
Any other road access.
Holland Access was looked at one of the options. It's extremely, there's not a good access point to this. It's just as steep everywhere else to this property. And basically you'd be building another Douty Road just to make it access. And if you think this option's expensive, just double it. You wouldn't get any fields.
We're talking about Douty Road, and I live at the corner of Douty Road and Stallion Hill. And that intersection, we've had accidents going into the neighbor's yard. I call the police on several occasions on doing that. But not only that, there's a stop sign. You can't see the direction from all areas at the stop sign. You have to stop if you do. And you have to inch your way through and watch for those people coming from Glenmine and coming up Stallion.
So a part of this project, when we go to design, is to look at traffic. And so with traffic conditions and potential improvements, there's definitely different things that could be done there. There could be a multiple way stop put in that location. All those, that is something that's addressed really at the planning stage and permitting stage.
I just wanted to bring your attention to that.
I'm fully aware.
Do we have an estimate on what's a two-part question? Do we have an estimate on what this all is going to cost at this point?
Yeah, we have preliminary numbers, but they're not even, I mean, it's multi-millions right now. But there's some overlap in those numbers, so there's clearing, but then the field's also upgrading. So I really am hesitant to put a number out there because, I mean, the range we're talking about, it could be a range of 15 million from one number to the next. So it's all over the map now because it's so preliminary. If there's major road design, depending on what we do for the irrigation, if the wells come out, it impacts it millions of dollars. So that's why it's so early.
What do we have left in the CPC after the bridge is approved?
Oh, I do not know because I don't know what's coming in again for this year. I don't have those numbers. but I know that depleted one portion, the recreation, we have the recreation portion, we have the general portion, so, and we'll be getting more in. I do not have the numbers off. When we go, and I go for this design money at some point, then we will have all of those numbers and look at, and again, CPC also has borrowing authority separate from town borrowing, so that's another consideration. But I don't off the top of my head have the number.
Sorry, I actually have a third question. Do we know if there's grants that are eligible for things like soccer fields? I
Yes.
see online that there's a ton of grants for trails
Yes.
and things.
We just had a discussion with CMRPC today, which is Central Mass Regional Planning. They were talking to us about grant opportunities. We had the economic development person, they was just talking today about they're doing a recreation inventory because they're seeing that the top industry in Massachusetts is tourism. And what they're finding is that actual active recreation and outdoor recreation is part of tourism. And they're looking at it that way in a broader light than they used to. And she was actually talking today about grants. Now, are we going to get grants to cover millions? Probably not, but are we going to be able to maybe get a few $100,000 here and a few $100,000 there? Absolutely, we will look at every opportunity to do that and work with organizations like CMRPC.
And that could be put towards the fields, because I'm just talking specifically.
It depends on where the grant options are. Is there open recreation? Is there, we were talking about, craft. There are all, the Patriots, craft. There are all sorts of opportunities for sports and recreation grants. So we will be actively looking at any opportunity we can to help offset costs. But again, in order to do that, really to get those grants, typically you need your design work. And you want shovel. It's much easier to get grants, good significant grants for shovel-ready projects.
Robert?
Yeah.
CPC balances?
Yep.
If you don't have the book from the recent annual town meeting,
Don't have it.
on the way out downstairs, the books are available there. In the back of that book are all the balances for all the categories within the CPC. You get the numbers you're looking for right in that book.
And then take into account how you'll have the years coming in.
Right.
How much does this cost us so far, right now?
$15,000.
How much?
$15,000.
Okay, and where did that money come from?
That was an article that, yes, so already passed an article at town meeting for that. Yep, no, that's town meeting funds that got passed. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Well, it feels a little awkward now asking about this after hearing the $1 million difference, but just curious if there's been any discussion about field maintenance, adding extra staffing for field maintenance?
Yes, so that's what we're gonna have to be prepared to answer for finance committee. There's no question that when you have a facility like this, there is going to be a maintenance cost. I do think though, like we said, that we can work with leagues, we can work on what our costs are to rent these fields out to different groups and different leagues to try to offset some of that cost. But again, because these are full-time year-round, I can't even say, well, we'll just use seasonal summer help, because these fields are gonna get used at least 9 months of the year.
That's what the experience, making sure that it's.
Yeah, we have to maintain, and I know the finance committee is not going to recommend approval of these projects, these CPC and CPC, unless I can answer that question. So I know them. But that's their job. And so my job is to answer everybody's concerns, and that's their concern. So yes.
So when you have special meetings for each part of this project, special town meetings that people have to actually go and vote, so I think it would be wise to make mention of that your vote counts, because if you don't get all the people that want certain parts and they don't come to vote, and people that don't want it voted down, so everybody, we have a town of how many thousand people?
And you get 100 people at town meeting.
You have a lot of parents.
Yeah, I cannot emphasize enough. I'm glad you bring that up, and anybody watching on TV, if you want these projects, or if you don't want these projects, whatever the case may be, you have to show up and vote. I mean, we have the best forward participatory government in the country, and we don't take advantage of it. So, absolutely.
Any of these phases that don't get the votes, it stops right
there. Yeah, now you're gonna have, well, some's gonna go in, some's not. You're not gonna have the beauty of the complete project. John in the back.
Yeah, I was just wondering, there's no plans for artificial lighting, right? It's just a dawn to dusk.
Yeah, I don't think we have any lighting. We didn't put lighting up there? No, come on.
design.
Yeah, there will be some,
There is electricity available on Douty Road, but then to run those electrical services and then quantifying how many lights would be needed. But if it is to be all seasonal, typically exterior lighting is recommended. However, I have not heard from the public about it being field lighting, which is very different than just exterior lighting. I don't think we've heard from anyone in the public about wanting.
and I
field
think
lighting.
as we get closer to that, that's gonna be, what type of lighting is gonna be a huge consideration, because we also want the area where we might have the telescope and sky watching, which is, that's part of those fields. And so if you're on the east, which is likely gonna be probably on the northeast side, I think
For the
we
flex
talked
field
about,
area,
for the
yeah.
flex field area. So if you do that, and you don't want so much lighting on the other side, that people have to wait till, 10 o'clock at night till the leaves go home, when you could be out there maybe at 8 o'clock. So, I mean, I think that those are gonna be again, this is really preliminary. So those are gonna be the design, this is why the $1 million in design work.
We lighted the field, the baseball field, over at the town barn when Annie was still director.
Yep.
And that came out great.
Yeah,
So
I mean, there's gotta be
LED
some,
lighting is
it's, the
beautiful.
question is how much they want.
I'd like to
Yeah,
touch
that's-
back what Ray just said there. If you have baseball fields, an expert, pretty bright lights, if you have night games or so forth. Did they ever have a veto part of this?
It's all gonna be voted town meeting.
No, I don't mean town, I mean people that right there. and-
No, it's like anything else, it's gonna, they either show up for or against, and have a vote like everybody else. So the reality is, this is why these projects just have to go into the public
Okay.
forum for votes.
All right.
Yeah, no, I understand the point, but the reality is we can't, you would never have anything go in if basically one neighbor could block it.
No, I understand.
And I'm not trying to be flip, I respect everybody's property rights, but that's just sort of the reality of it.
Yeah, I will also say that when it comes to field lighting nowadays with the modern LED lights, they very much take that light pollution into account. And I've been at fields where there's a house 30 feet away from the field, and that house, like yes, there's light, but there's no light coming into the house because they're very directional now.
Even our new lights on the town common have a down light, so that it.
Be dark sky compliant.
Yeah, so that it didn't.
So what you're saying is they're 4 years behind.
Yeah, the technology's great. Ma'am?
Back to the question about meeting attendance, are you thinking about bringing back babysitters for the meetings because it's very hard on a weekday?
We can talk about that, that'll, so different discussion, but
It's like
we've
the
talked about it, yeah, the
fields
town clerk has talked about it, and we know we have something that tends to be a family-based issue, we will try. I know they've done it in the past, they've had nobody come, but we certainly are, I'm open to absolutely having that. Participation is so critical in anything in government. Yes, sir.
Couple of comments. First of all, thanks to everybody involved. I think a huge applause, honestly, because I think you really thought through all of the town needs and you thought about all the involved constituencies. So people from newborns to 100-year-old individuals can use this complex. There's a lot of communities in the state that have complexes at least as nice as this without CPC funding, and also with lower tax rates. So I think this is a project that Sturbridge has deserved for a long time, and I hope we can really rally around it. What determines whether or not we're going to have a special town meeting?
Depends on what the needs are. We are likely going to have one over some zoning changes that we have to do unrelated to this completely. And if that happens, then we would put this on the special, the design work. Nothing determines it except that we say, you know what, this is important enough to do now and get rolling on. I'm inclined, if I take a big look at what the CPC balances are, what we're going to ask for, what we think this design and permitting is going to be, all of that. But I'm likely inclined to do it special. But if we have a special, it's likely will go on. If we don't have one anyway, which we probably will, we could. My only concern ever with the special, it goes back to what you're talking about with people showing up. My only concern with the special is something this important people are aware of, but I never want to look like I'm trying to slip something through in a special on people, because people are disengaged in the off-season. People know, annual town meeting, they come, and yes, it is the responsibility of the people, but I also feel it's sort of the responsibility of us not to ever appear that we're trying to slide something by the public. Everybody should have the opportunity. Now, is it on them to be paying attention? Yeah, but people are busy and people have lives. So I am inclined to think we would put this on a special.
And one more comment or question. and that is I see really good alignment between this and the new open space plan for the town of
Yes.
Sturbridge, so compliments on that as well. I think that's really exciting. The only piece I didn't see was for, I don't know, arts and maybe performance space. Can that be included here? And again, could that be a long-term piece of the project?
I think we talked about amphitheater at one point, but it just,
Didn't fit.
We did, and the lack of electrical, there is electricity in Douty, but the demands that might be needed, again, that would be a feasibility study to understand that infrastructure. However, I think when we talked about the flex field space,
yes.
and having it programming for athletic practices, but then also recreation programming like stargazing nights, where on a designated night, let's say 2 times this summer, it's programmed into the town's events or something like that. I don't see why the flex field space, because it'll be so large and level, couldn't be activated for some type of temporary stage, maybe a generator to provide that kind of demand.
I think the pavilion areas as well. Yep. You're gonna have covered pavilions, so that would be.
We were also concerned about the impact on the neighborhood,
Yes.
just because of the elevation.
Music is a little,
So, yeah.
and we have the common for concerts, so, I mean, I think we have a place for that. So, but we did, it was a discussion.
Okay, thank you.
I just have an informational statement. The agendas for the Board of Selectmen meetings are posted ahead of time, and they detail when we're talking about warrant articles, what's going to be discussed at. So are the finance committees, and they're televised, yes, and you can't call in. So show up in this room if you really want to influence the outcome before it gets on the before it
Because
gets approved, and then the only vote then is when you go to town meeting.
Because
You come in
FinCom's
here
vote-
and have input while we're talking about it.
And FinCom's vote holds a lot of weight with the public, and if
We
you
make
want
the
the
motion.
finance committee to hear what your views are as well, that they need to hear you.
Remember, the main motion at the town meeting comes from finance.
It's finance.
Not from the selectmen.
Yes.
And we can change that motion, whatever they put, we can change it. So if you want to have it, so people should, I mean, you can shout and scream and say,
Really
no, we don't
important.
like this. Yeah.
Can emphasize that. Yes, ma'am.
Will there be another opportunity to give input about details of the project?
No, at this point, no. We have to kind of make a decision and move forward. If we go beyond this, it opens up a Pandora's box. You move one thing, you change one thing, something else comes up. But again, some of the small details, the lines of sight for a playground, can you put the 2 playgrounds together and one over here instead? Some of those little details, I think we can, the smaller scale, but the basic large scale footprint is this is it.
Yeah, just because I thought of it with the lighting being brought up.
Yeah.
What it looks like for us who run athletics, like to have practices very limited time without lighting. If you go to any given practice in the fall, you'll see people bring like their personal generators to light up.
Yeah. No, it's certainly, and that will all be part of the design consideration. The lighting is really more specific and will be part of the general design. Right now, we have not really delved into that.
And I definitely second down on the lighting situation.
Yeah,
It's-
it's gonna
Most
be-
fall sports, it's
There's gonna have to be something.
throwing footballs in the dark is
It
not
doesn't
fun for
work.
the kids.
Yeah,
No,
baseball's
no.
not.
My major push with any of these types of things would be, even if lights aren't part of an initial project, that light infrastructure would be part of it, so that we're not then ripping up a field 5 years later to add lights and all that, so.
100%.
Yes, ma'am. I just have a question about the multi-purpose fields. Why natural turf versus AstroTurf? Like, I'm not pushing either way.
So that's a great question. We have talked about turf at Burgess. It may or may not eventually happen. I don't think it will though. There is a move away from turf, from artificial turf. There was a big move toward it a few years ago. They moved it from being rubber, basically, and plastics-based and petroleum-based. They moved it to like cork and peanut-based. But there's still a lot of controversy about it. There's still a lot of debate over whether kids should play on natural grass for injuries and whatnot. And I will be frank, I think given the nature of that property itself, maybe somewhere else I would have looked, like Burgess, we were looking at turf, artificial turf. I just think given the whole natural field there, that a turf option would have presented, not that I'm afraid of controversy, but I don't want so much controversy that a project dies. And I have to be honest, I think if we put artificial turf, people who are borderline on supporting fields would go the other way, and I really want to do this in a way, I'm not trying to say to pander to any one group, but to make it palatable to all, if that's the better way to say it. I really want this to be palatable to everybody. I don't want somebody to hold their nose and vote for it and say, I really hate this, and I detest turf fields, but I guess we need fields. Like, I just want this to be a positive community thing, and I think when you throw in the concept of artificial turf, if I was gonna do it at Burgess alone, I'd fight that fight, and I'd say it's worth it, it's worth it for maintenance and all that stuff. Not on this property.
I just didn't know if there was a maintenance cost associated with maintaining.
It is easier, in some ways you get the equipment, but I don't think it's easy, artificial is easier, yeah. So, you know.
Going back to the lighting question that was being asked, just curious, have we looked into or are we considering any kind of solar option as far as, not the field lights, I understand that would be insane, but for along the pathways to the fields, along the parking lots, at the snack shacks, like just having some solar options to help with.
So we're still way preliminary for that, but I absolutely think that we're gonna look at all of those options, and it's gonna be a combination of cost and effectiveness and all of those things, and sometimes solar depends on the you know, the tree cover or the
It's going to be completely open, that's
So
fine.
that part's gonna be open, and you know, we got that beautiful western sunset, so there probably will be some aspects where we include that, and we might be able to get some grant money for some of that work.
I'm not saying solar.
No, it's some of the ancillary lighting, yeah, but I think we're really way preliminary.
Solar farm.
Just real quick, would you mind just summarizing again, so for us to stay involved and to follow this process, what the next steps are, timelines, where we should be, and where can we get information to just stay in tune with what is being discussed?
Perfect question. So, the timeline is, we go back now, we presented this to you, I think it's generally positive in this room, and I'm sure I'll get some emails before it gets to the next few days, people watching on TV. Our next step is to really look at moving toward going out for design and permitting. And that's going to require special town meeting funding.
Yeah.
And so I would say likely for people to keep their eyes open through September, probably, if we do, there are other issues with special town meetings, probably like a November town meeting, I'm thinking. And Aiden is not, usually don't look at Gene, but Aiden will be a point of contact on a lot of that for the design work as well. But the special town meeting, he and I are going to be working on, because we've got a whole host of other things going on with some zoning issues statewide. So I would say start watching around September for when we will set a date for town meeting for special, and if this ends up on it. I put pretty much everything on the Sturbridge Town Administrator page. That gets copied to our website. It's not already there, but it will also go on our website. Recreation, I'm going to ask that Recreation post. Typically, Andrew picks up on everything we post. So the Recreation page, my Town Administrator page, the town's Facebook page, and the town's website. And then we do as much, we have to do some outreach anyway for all town meeting. You know, we do some public notice and posting. So start looking sometime in September to see when a date might be set for town meeting. If you do not see or do not hear, you all know how to reach me. You can message me on my Facebook Messenger, my Town Administrator Facebook page. I did put a post, some people will message me on my personal Facebook page. I don't always respond because I don't always get to my personal messenger. And I also, there's a weird kind of nuance legally about, like, that becomes then all public property. So I ask that you just message me on the Town Administrator one, not that I have anything all that controversial on my personal page. But
And at that special, it would be a vote to approve funding to do this
Design
study
and
and the
permitting.
design permitting.
Design and permitting is the
Got it.
next phase.
Yep.
Yep. But that's going to be significant because that is likely going to be at least $1 million, realistically, at least $1 million, $1 million to $1.5 million.
Thank you.
Design. Yes, sir.
175 parking spaces, you said?
Yes, yes.
Is the estimated, but it could be maximized and increased more, or it could be reduced depending on the needs.
We have a sense, or with the math right, that's what, about 700, 800 people, if each car were filled, this is what capacity would be if all of these things were being used at the same time.
That's a great question. So we can look at the ITE manual to see, based on these athletic uses, what the outcome would be for if all uses were an event at the same time. But a lot of the spaces will have mixed hours and shared parking for, you know, the uses throughout the day, weekends, you know, that varies greatly too.
Preschool kids aren't going to cross with
Yeah.
leagues, for example.
So So it does depend, but we can follow up as we get into design and provide, especially information during that planning and permitting
I think
stage.
leery to go
rather than
less.
wait around.
I would be a little leery to go less if we're looking at having leaks come in than going much less than 175 spaces. The last thing we want is poor parking.
No, I agree. I think that's part of where my thought was coming from, is what would that look like in terms of if we have all 3 fields in use for games, people are there for walking, there's other kids or grandparents who never come to play or whatever stuff. Like, how quickly would that fill up? And is it, like, how much of a concern would that be? Like, how many people should we expect?
Yeah, and that could be discussed during planning and permitting, but also generally the infrastructure. We try not to design parking lots for event use because it's,
40 people, 40 kids
you
to
know,
field.
once in a blue moon, it depends on what it is, and the cost, and then the hardscape that remains because of that is, sometimes it just doesn't align with community values and needs. So it is a balance to know what the needs are, what the shared use is, and what the maximum capacity is, and that can all be discussed during design.
And part of design and permitting is just that, it goes in front of the planning board. And planning starts looking at what are those normal uses, what is we have formulas for when people do a subdivision or a parking lot for a care salon. You need 1.5 spots per chair. There's always something. John, did you want
I
to?
just say there's also plenty of room out there for expansion. I think this is just shown for this plan right now, but that will be part of the design as far as, what you expect as far as how many parents, grandparents, what does a field take, so we can certainly move it to expand.
And I also think you don't want to over-park.
Yes.
You don't want to create too much parking until you have some usage information as well, too. Because there's ways to design overflow areas into the plan without paving everything, too.
Let's go with someone new. That's actually good.
With the parking, whoever ends up looking at leagues at like how much space we already take up at the junior high, because we're already overflowed on a weekend at the junior high and the high school. So I don't even know how many spaces are there,
But again, that all comes down to that's that whole design and permit phase. And so that's why that what that $1 million goes to, that's why, it's a huge number. So but
That's
design and permit,
I'd be like on down.
that's all part of that, that's all part of that next phase.
Not that it's ideal, but I mean, if it was overfilled, is there room for supplemental, like, congrass parking or something?
Yeah, I think we're ahead of ourselves on that. Yeah, we're way ahead of ourselves at this point, because there is room to do more, or something like that, or a gravel area, or, so, again, that's gonna all come down to what the planning board, in fact, with the chair of the planning board back there, that's all gonna come down to what, planning looks at and deems appropriate. And again, those are public meetings. So that's what you have to remember, every phase of this in some form or another, whether it's planning, whether it's a whatever trips might trip in conservation, whatever recreation does, everything that happens from here on any kind of thing that's going to go on is public.
So is this going to be for Sturbridge residents only, the general, or can people from other towns come in and use the playground?
We won't be monitoring, I mean, it would be really hard to monitor. We're not gonna charge a tag system or have a town pass, it's not like a town beach. We'll keep it open, and one of the reasons to do that is the leagues, while they might be basically Sturbridge leagues, you might have kids from other communities, and so you don't wanna get into that. And if there's any federal funding that we use, typically, if you use any federal funding, you cannot restrict it. I know with like CDBG, I know you can't, but anytime you use federal funding, and I'd like to be able to go for grants on everything, and I think even if you use state grants, you really get into a little bit of a hairy ground restricted.
2 questions. First one, how far north is vehicle access north of the parking lot?
That's a great question. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can follow up with you and let you know.
Access for emergencies and public safety concerns.
So there are emergency access points built in.
But they're not on the road though.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll definitely.
And then, very important question for all people in leagues, where's the AD going to be located in this facility?
The what?
The AD. I don't know.
Oh, the defibrillator, yeah, that will all come in. So when it all goes in front of land use and everything else, Jen Ash is in there. So we'll definitely have the safety standards built in. Yeah, especially, absolutely. And your access, fire access on and off of that, where the fields are, where we're likely to have, if there are going to be injuries or if there's serious injury, all that would be taken into consideration. So let's wrap up. Any final questions? Yes, Katie.
Yeah, no, I want to thank everybody again for coming out. And I think, as most people said earlier, this captures a lot of what came out earlier from our previous meeting in terms of the needs of the town. I'll answer a few questions about like CPC because I served on that board. So with the fields, I know a lot of fields people are here. Any project we do, we have to do some form of borrowing. I don't want us to think that if one part of the project gets funded, then the other part won't get funded because we're taking money away. It will have to get to that 2/3 vote, more than likely, because it has to get, it's going to get water. Right now, it's, I think it's 883,000 in the undesignated fund balance that we can use. It's total like 2.3 plus an extra 500,000.
500 coming back.
That's coming back.
Yeah.
But then that's never going to be enough to cover the entire project. So as we get through this together, we have to kind of do it together as a group. You can start thinking trails versus open space versus fields. Nothing typically gets done there. So again, I think you guys captured a lot of what we're trying to get. I think if we, as we work together as residents moving forward, I think this would be good for all residents.
Thank you, and I think that's the key point. We can't have people in factions, or else we're never going to get 2/3, and that's what we need. So I want to thank you all. If you think of questions, do not hesitate to email me or message me, and I will get them to the right parties. But again, you have everybody sort of here who's got a voice in all of this. Keep your eyes open for next steps. Follow the Facebook pages and the town website. And I want to thank you all for your interest in this. This is such a great community type of thing.
Just your post for things. This meeting was only posted about maybe 2 or 3 days ago.
Yeah, it seems to me, I posted it on the website like 2 weeks ago as a meeting, and then Janae posted the flyer on the homepage, and then it went on various Facebook pages later as
my page actually went on relatively late. Usually
that's where I.
So my page came on a little late, but it was, So just keep looking at all of the sources so you don't miss it.
I'm just trying to get noticed more.
Absolutely. The more we can put it out there.
And the website, as much as you like to use it, it's not as user-friendly.
What we also can do is we can have a flash put up on the channel 191 or 192. Put a hey announcement town meeting, so people who watch our Spectrum will also be aware. So that's sometimes a good way to reach people who aren't computer savvy or on, because we do have people in town who don't navigate the internet. So thank you all.